What in the world is going on with Joel Embiid's knee? And how likely is it that his career could actually be starting a downtrend? Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and the goal in this channel is to teach you more about the medical side of the sports world. We've covered a lot of Embiid's injury history on this channel, but things have really taken a turn here this season with Embiid continuing to miss games, the concern about not playing back-to-backs going forward, and this unknown just continued knee problem. There was a lot going around social media last week, people wondering just what in the world was going on, and I replied with really a statement that is true. It's really not that complicated to try and make sense of what is happening with Embiid's knee and what to expect in the near future and the rest of his career. And so we're going to dive into it in this video. First of all, I want you to understand that there's a difference between having an injury and having intermittent pain and symptoms. Embiid seems to be much more on the side of he is having pain as opposed to he has some new injury. And you might think, what's really the difference? The difference is something happened, something changed. There was a moment, a play where he had a sprain in a ligament, a new tear in his meniscus, versus the other situation that happens more commonly as players have had an injury history, they age, is their body, their joints start to be more prone to having aches and pains that affect their play. And I think that's more of what's going on here with Embiid. I don't think I would classify him as being injured, quote unquote. I think I would classify this as he is just dealing with recurrent pain in his knee, likely as a result of previous injuries. So don't think there's some injury that the Sixers are covering up. I think this is just that difference between a player having pain that has to be managed versus a player having a new injury. And I'll say too, before we dive into the anatomy, the medical side of this, I'm definitely on Embiid's side with this because I think a lot of it, the problems, the controversy we're seeing in the media stems from the lack of transparency and expectations from the Sixers front office about the honesty of where Embiid's body is and what stage he's in his career. Because I think the portrayal that we see is that they expect him to be 100% healthy, the Embiid of old, when the honest reality is probably just not the case. I mean, goodness, we've been seeing Embiid playing with this big, massive, bulky brace on his knee for now months, if not years, and this is not something that you need to do if you have a fully normal, healthy knee. And so Embiid has all of these expectations and pressures put on him by, I believe, being pushed by the front office that just don't seem realistic for him to live up to at this point in his career. Now we're going to dive into the injury history all the way back with that very first meniscus tear, but first I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video. Today's video is sponsored by Gronns. Gronns is a simple daily gummy that features all the key vitamins and nutrients that your body needs in a simple, convenient, and delicious taste. I was so happy to get rid of all those endless powders and pills and just never-ending supplements for a simple grab-and-go snack pack of gummies that features everything that I'm looking for with that daily nutrition. Gronns has also just completely rebranded their product. It's the same great-tasting, comprehensive formula, but now in a more fun outside packaging that makes it different than all those other boring vitamins and supplements. And right now you can get up to 45% off. Just click the link down in the description below. I'm amazed how they're able to get such great nutrition in a delicious, honestly really nice tasting gummy that makes me feel like I'm eating my kids' fruit snacks. And as a research, scientific minded person, I really like how the ingredients are dosed. It is possible to get too much of certain vitamins, but Gronns keeps it safe by getting no more than 100% of the safer vitamins and let 25% of ones that can be toxic at higher levels. I really love the convenience of the little packets. I can easily throw them in my backpack if I'm traveling on a plane or out of town for some sports coverage. So again, get up to 45% off by clicking the link down in the description below. Thank you again to Gronns for sponsoring today's video, and let's get back to our learning. Everything for Embiid with that left knee goes back to this injury in 2017 when he sustained his first meniscal tear. And it's important because of what they did to treat it and which meniscus it was. Of course, in the knee, you have a medial and a lateral meniscus. And in 2017, Embiid had a tear in his lateral, meaning outer meniscus. And the exact report from the surgeon who did the operation said that they removed a small portion of the meniscus that was responsible for his symptoms. So Embiid's first surgery was what we call a partial meniscectomy, meaning they resected part of that meniscus tissue. Fast forward now 7 years, and Embiid suffered another tear, had to have another surgery in that same lateral meniscus. The reporting was a little bit mixed in terms of some stuff said repair. The timeline with which he came back would more so imply that it was another partial meniscectomy, meaning removal of more of that meniscal tissue. So if we go in here and take a look at our biodigital anatomy tool, we really need to understand what the meniscus is doing, what the implications are if you remove part of it, and how that is going to affect the rest of your joint and possible symptoms. So there is a medial, meaning an inner right here, and a lateral meniscus. These meniscus are these two kind of C-shaped pieces of cartilage that sit inside your knee. We can't see them on an x-ray. You have to have an MRI to look at them. And yes, they are cushions. Everybody calls them the shock protectors or the shock pads, shock absorbers of the knee, but they're also extremely important for stabilizing the joint as well. Now, if you look at the knee from the side, we're going to hide the lateral collateral ligament out here. And this is really going to help us understand the biomechanic importance of the meniscus and why we want to try and save as much of it as possible. Whenever you are standing, running, jumping, you have these joint contact forces where the femur is transmitting load down to the tibia. You can see that the femoral condyles are rounded and the tibial plateau is flat. If you did not have a meniscus in your knee, what you would have is essentially a rounded surface making a single point contact with the tibia. The meniscus comes into play because it makes contact along that surface of the femur and distributes those contact forces more widely across the surface of the knee so that you don't have these individual hot spots of increased pressure on the bone. Increased pressure on the bone, increased stress on the bone is what leads to more risk of osteoarthritis, which is wear and damage and loss of that cartilage, which puts more stress on the bone, makes the joint hurt, inflammation, etc., and that downstream effect. So whenever you take out part of this meniscus tissue, you are removing part of the body's ability to cushion and stabilize and protect, distribute those forces throughout the knee. And the lateral compartment, the lateral meniscus, is even more important in this regard than, say, the medial meniscus. We always get more concerned about injuries to the lateral meniscus because of the contact forces in that lateral compartment and how taking out part of that lateral meniscus can have more negative implications than, say, part of the medial meniscus. Now, this is not a fault of the surgeons. Oftentimes when surgeons get in there, they can't repair, they can't sew that tear back together to try and maintain as much tissue as possible. And the only realistic option is to do a meniscectomy and cut it out for improvement in symptoms. It's a balance. When we hear about meniscal repair versus meniscus resection, repair, you sew it back together. Resection, you cut it out. So now Joel Embiid, a large human running up and down the court, jumping, playing a very high impact sport, in the span of 7 years has had 2 surgeries to remove part of his lateral meniscus. There's a finite amount of meniscus tissue in here. You get to a point where you can take so much of it out that you really lose all ability of that meniscus to protect and absorb forces through the joint. Specifically, if you've got a tear at the root of the meniscus, where it's anchored in the front or where it's anchored around in the backside, a single tear in those locations can be extremely detrimental to the knee and cause rapid progression of arthritis because of that loss of hoop stress in the meniscus to maintain that cushion and that weight distribution. Now, we don't know specifically how much meniscus has been removed from Joel, but we know he's had 2 surgeries and we know that this knee has continued to bother him. You guys may remember I did a video about this brace we saw Embiid wearing a number of years ago. This is an unloader brace. This is a brace that is designed to try and take weight off of one of the compartments in the knee. And so even back then, Embiid was being managed with specific braces to try and minimize the stress, minimize the load on one of the compartments in his knee. So we've seen evidence of issues with this knee going back many years, which is why to me it's not surprising, and it's a pretty simple explanation for why he's continuing to have these issues. And this is where it gets back to that idea of, are you injured, a new injury, versus this is just the residual effects of everything that's happened before. I don't think that it was bad for Embiid to play in the Olympics. I don't think anybody can blame the Olympics as a cause for what's going on in his knee right now. What's going on in his knee right now is most likely the result of everything that has happened in his knee the last 7 to 8 years that eventually starts to catch up with you. That would explain the swelling that he's managing, because that is a very up and down phenomenon. You have good weeks, you have bad weeks, you have good months, you have bad months. You slightly twist your knee a certain way that would seem otherwise non-specific, and now your knee is more irritated and swollen because, again, you don't have as much tissue in there to protect the joint, potentially some development of arthritis in the knee, all very common things that we can see after you have had multiple meniscus surgeries. You're a bigger player and you're playing an impact sport. The challenge going forward with this is that there is not a miraculous way to fix all of this. We saw what Lonzo Ball went through with these continuous reports of, well, he's going to be great, full recovery expected, et cetera, et cetera. And the next thing we know, boom, Lonzo Ball has had a meniscus transplant and cartilage transplant surgery because of the extent of what was going on in his knee. So that is an example of what can happen, not a guarantee of what's going on with Joel, but that is an example of what you can see. And look at the player size, the type of Lonzo versus somebody like Embiid. It's possible for these players to develop that cartilage wear. Brandon Roy, another example, Greg Oden. We see it a lot in basketball, and so it should not be that big of a surprise that Embiid could potentially be dealing with a similar situation. You try and manage the pain as best you can. You can do different injections like PRP, bone marrow aspirate, the stem cell injections as people call them, and potentially try to manage pain, manage inflammation, manage symptoms. But oftentimes it is a process that will continue month over month, year over year, and potentially lead to further injuries. So I don't think that it's fair for all of the impression I'm getting from the Sixers front office to be putting the expectation on Joel that he's going to have the same minutes, he's going to have the same intensity, and he's going to have the same body that he did 5 to 7 years ago. I think Embiid is clearly in a different stage of his career, and it's not that difficult to understand why. He's been through injuries. It's an unfortunate part of playing sports, and all of the pieces make sense in terms of what could be continuing to cause the swelling and everything in his knee. Sure, if you shut him down for a month, that could help, but then you run just as much of a risk that that swelling and irritation is going to come back a month later and continue to be an up and down process, and that's where we need to have a change in expectations. There needs to be very clear expectations set that maybe we can't expect him to be the same player that he was before in terms of minutes, intensity, and productivity, so that Sixers fans and everybody can stop pestering him for trying to fake injuries or whatnot, or be lazy or a wimp or anything like that. There has been enough happen in Joel Embiid's knee that he has every reason to have intermittent inflammation, swelling, pain in his joint with playing high-level basketball, and some of that is just the nature of what we need to expect going forward. I don't know if it's to the point where something like a cartilage transplant, meniscus transplant, etc. would be considered. Usually surgeons are thinking about those when there are focal areas of high grade, like a pothole in the cartilage, as opposed to just scattered cartilage wear. But that might be something that they're considering or thinking about at some point to not only salvage his knee for basketball, but to salvage as much as you can of the knee going forward. Obviously, that's a very big step. Embiid's size makes that certainly more challenging than somebody like Lonzo. But these are the kind of things that we have to be thinking about, and you have to be sort of mentally prepared for as an NBA fan, as a Sixers fan, as Embiid enters the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years of his career as real possibilities. So remember, when you hear about somebody having a meniscus surgery, number one, sometimes it truly is necessary. Everything else has failed. They're having continued pain, and the only thing that makes reasonable sense is to go in and remove part of that meniscus. But with each subsequent time that you have to do that, you limit the meniscus's ability to cushion, to protect, to stabilize the knee. And then if you combine that with repetitive, high-impact sport in a heavier guy, you run the risk of having further meniscal tearing, cartilage wear, all of which can very clearly cause inflammation, swelling, and intermittent pain that are not so much an injury, but recurrent symptoms that intermittently have to be managed. We can't be holding this against Embiid. Embiid seemingly did not do anything wrong in this whole situation. This is the unfortunate nature of playing sports and having injuries. So Sixers fans, please don't try to hold this against him. Look more towards the reporting you're seeing from the front office, the expectations that are being set, and realize that it's likely time that we take a step in a different direction, reevaluate those expectations, and understand that after what Embiid has gone through with his injury history, all of this makes perfect sense, and it's something that likely we'll have to continue being prepared for in the future. That's it for the video, everybody. Thank you again to Gronns for sponsoring today's video. Be sure and check the link in the description below for that great discount. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.